I had one question concerning your conversation in relation to the origin of the virus. I've I've been reading some Chinese newspapers, and they have conversation in newspaper that they believe that the virus has actually been planted and that it's a biological virus. And what they make mention to was the military games that were held in the city of Wuhan, where the United States brought in a team that not only performed poorly, but stayed in proximity to the various centers where they claimed that animals were being processed. And the reason why I say that is because we all know that there's a confrontation between the United States and China as far as who's going to be the world leader. So that would give credence to the conversation, and also parallel in the fact that the Chinese are trying to set up the new Silk Roads, which would pretty much integrate all of Eurasia and eliminate the United States from introductory trade. So I'd like to hear your views or comments on that position. Thank you.
Sure. Oh yeah, thanks, Vlad. I appreciate that. I have to say that I don't necessarily agree about the theory about the military games there. I think if you look at genetics of the virus, they're very close to samples that were taken in bats in China itself. I think it's very clear that it emerged in China. There is, of course, conflicting hypotheses about how it did so. But for the most part, I don't think the United States brought it in. However, there's much in what you say that I actually agree with, and here's where it's at. The first thing is, on the one hand, we do seem to have this kind of clash between the United States and China, and it's something I'm going to get into. But in addition, the US and China are fundamentally integrated economically in many ways, although that might be changing. So what I find fascinating is that some of the agriculture that, in my mind, pushed the deforestation is in part funded by foreign direct investment from companies in the United States. I think the one that really grasps my imagination is the Goldman Sachs post-housing crisis in 2009, bought many poultry and hog farm in central China. So in essence, this desire to, in essence, basically set off US and China is an attempt to divide and conquer much of the world's population into, in essence, the next iteration of a Cold War. But we shouldn't forget that many, as Marx called them, something on the order of, I'm paraphrasing, their enemy brothers, in the sense of those who run the capitalist system in various forms and fashions are in essence working together to engage in expropriation around the world, and often they go in together on various programs. And I think Chinese agriculture is a good example of that. Now, on the other hand, the clash between the United States and China is something that's real, in my mind. On the one hand, I go to the world systems theorists who speak about cycles of accumulation from one part of the world to the other. So, early capitalism began in the Italian city-states. Once that cycled out, it moved to Spain, you have the Netherlands, you have the Brits and the United States. And what often happens is in the early stages of the cycles of accumulation, you have countries in the bourgeoisie of the countries working with the state to, in essence, churn money into capital, right? And that's it requires a kind of building out of kind of imperial infrastructure around the world in order to land grab and take resources to turn into commodities and so on. But then imperial systems do fall apart. And then on the other side of the cycle of accumulation, the bourgeoisie of any country of that particular imperial system are engaged in the business of churning capital back into money. So in essence, as the system falls apart there, they're cashing out. And we see certainly post-World War II, the US really taking command of the world capitalist system and in essence helping run it for the bourgeoisie around the world in such a way that, yes, the US would get most of the fruits of that imperial system, but bourgeoisie in countries around the world can still make quite a buck. But what's fascinating to see in the past couple months is, in essence, the total abandonment of that program. Every administration since World War II, Democrat and Republican, has fully bought into that program. And I'm really speaking in really broad strokes here, but we see Trump is in essence basically bailed out of that. We were already on decline in that way, but as policies and decisions to make in terms of our capacity to engage to basically run the capitalist system, we have in essence truly bailed out in a profound way. And CDC was part of that program. We sent CDC researchers around the world to quash potential pandemic outbreaks as our contribution to making sure that the global capitalist system still ran and people and many bourgeoisie can continue to make a lot of money. You don't want a pandemic with a capitalist system. I mean, really, as we see, is really screwing things up. The economy, global economy, was in somewhat decline in the past couple of years, but I mean, it's really again, the technical term, the shit has hit the fan. You know, sending 50 million Americans into unemployment is not a good thing for capitalists. It's not just that the system isn't working. I mean, they certainly have pushed off the worst of the damage onto them, but 50 million Americans, that's a lot of people to try to control, who are very upset about what's going on, and start to get ideas that the political class can't run things. They don't know how to keep things going. And they weren't doing very well before, but they were able to basically, you know, push off the worst of the damage on certain classes of people, primarily Black and brown people, but also the poorest white people as well. They can get away with it, but that is now, politically speaking, expanded out into much of the country. And much of the country is becoming, in my view, increasingly to its senses, also increasingly deranged, but that's a conversation for another day. And things are flying off the handle, and it's not clear what's going to happen next on that. But as far to wrap up, the United States and China's on the other end of it. In my view, they're in the front end of their cycle of accumulation. As you brought up, the Silk Roads, they're interested in turning money into capital, along with the imperial infrastructure with that. And so they have, in essence, some money, some skin in the game, as it were, to make sure that public health works worldwide. Now, on the one hand, they, in my view, in the course of using the BRICS road to move out of poverty, general poverty, they help bring about many of these outbreaks to begin with. Again, they're not the only one. But on the other hand, they sent aid to countries around the world for COVID-19. They have pledged to allow any vaccines that they develop to be available worldwide. And then to wrap this up, I'm fascinated by all the other countries who are not within either sphere, who came to their own decisions about it. Some more socialistic, some more capitalistic. I think of Taiwan, you think Vietnam, you think of New Zealand, you think of countries that in essence saw governance as being something of helping the general populace, which many of the countries on their far side of the capital accumulation don't do. The Brits are out of it, the US is out of it. But it's really remarkable, the variation involved. You have Cuba sending doctors to a NATO country like Italy. You have I think it was the Senegalese who developed a test in the early days of the outbreak that could identify infections in 4 hours. Here we are, we're in July, and people can't get access to tests, and they get results back in like 12, 14 days, which in essence is pretty useless because you probably could have gotten infected along the way within the 2 weeks. So all our efforts to basically shelter in place is basically gone to waste. That was supposed to buy us time to allow us to develop these tests and vaccines and antivirals and develop these kind of state version of mutual aid, right? I mean, many a mutual aid program going on. It speaks to, as Riley was getting at, the capacity of the American people to stand up for themselves and take care of themselves as best you can. But it should have been the state that basically should have been going around house to house and saying, are you okay? Do you need anything? Food trucks from building to building. I mean, think of all the things we could have thought of in terms of making sure that people were infected, were able to stay home, not have to go to work, not have to go back in the meatpacking factory because they have bills to pay. That is so topsy-turvy to the present state of things.
As a member of the biotech community in the Bay Area, I've been working this field for 30 years now, and I'm seeing something for the first time I have ever seen in all that time, and that is companies starting to work together. I've been working with the biotech company across the street from me in order to make sure they have the supplies they need for their tests, their studies. And this is happening all over in the smaller and some of the larger biotechs. And I just wanted to put that out there because so much of the time people are angry with big pharma. They don't like big pharma, but there is some good coming out of this. And this is a bright cloud. We're working, I'm with Novartis, and we're working with some of the smaller companies, and it's wonderful to see that. So just to give a little spark of brightness there.
I just want to talk about how you kind of touched on the fact that, this is, this idea of like individuality is hella pervasive in our society. And that kind of like brought upon the problem of like, everyone thinking we can handle this problem by ourselves. And like really the only way to combat this is like, everyone coming together and making sure they wear their mask and, doing collective actions, like helping people, and I'm just glad you touched on that, how like, like you touched on mutual aid and things like that. And like, because we think we're all like, sectioned off and like, oh, we can handle this by ourselves. But you see how crazy it spreads, when people don't work together. It's just like, it jumps from, the middle of the jungle to fucking, to the person sitting on the beach in Florida, like you said, and how like, if we don't work together, we can't do anything, So I just wanted to say that and tell you I appreciate your talk.
Hey, Rob, thank you so much for your talk. So I'm an organizer with Extinction Rebellion, a climate justice group, as well as Animal Rebellion. And for environmentalists concerned about the destructive impact of factory farming on climate and animal welfare, the pandemic is a major trigger event. Zoonotic pandemics and infectious diseases are now an environmental issue, as you mentioned, connected to ecological encroachment. I'm really curious to get your thoughts on kind of developing a global strategy to tackle this issue. Deforestation is bad, so is factory farming. Domestically in the United States, where do you see the greatest risk for novel zoonotic viruses and pandemics to emerge? And what systemic changes would you suggest we demand to mitigate this emergence? And just any other ideas on strategy? Thank you.
The thing is, in my mind, and given our audience here, we can speak about their fractions of capital, meaning different sectors in capital in terms of what they think about what's going on. As I said, an outbreak is not very good ways of accumulating capital, although obviously some efforts will be made to make a buck off this, and that's the horrible thing. In fact, that's what happened with the meatpacking. They claim that we need to open up the meatpacking plants in order to continue to produce meat. But actually, as I think Times reported, you had record exports to China. And in essence, the big meat was attempting to protect its investment in China, in part because in the China, African swine fever had emerged and killed half the swine in 2019. But you see, in essence, across the political spectrum, people increasingly upset about what's happening. In essence, and we're in the embarrassment of the world, complete failure to even respond in the most obvious way. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of big biotech. However, we do need vaccines and other antivirals and things that can intervene. I prefer the public model, but I do not, take any way from anybody anywhere here willing and able to work together to try to do something to intervene in such a way to help each other, whether it's in the streets of Oakland or in biotech in San Francisco. Now, as far as JJ's point, it really speaks to what happened to us. I mean, you gotta, what happened that we came to a point where we were so sectioned off from each other that even those of us on the left, in essence, have accepted many of the premises of our ostensible enemy. That we have these cultural impulses that speak to very much that we are American as anybody else. And when we're confronted with such a crisis, it really puts us on the spot to, in essence, take a good look in the mirror. I mean, our society isn't the only thing in the mirror, and then this is a terrible thing because it enforces your point that we're all, trapped in individualism. But for each of us, we're in essence also looking in the mirror and seeing that many of the things we believed was actually not true, and that it forces us to step up into what is an historical crossroads and really make a push to trying to bring something new. And one of the things I got out of Mike Davis's recent book, in the first chapter there, I think it's been the most prescient thing I've read for this pandemic, and it has nothing to do with viruses. And what he does is he gives a 150-year history, primarily in the European and United States, of left organizing. And what he talks about, and the thing that really stuck with me, was that organizing wasn't only in the factory. What you had is the neighborhoods would back the work actions. And so, if there was any, if a group of workers went on strike at any one particular factory, they organized across neighborhoods and across factories to, in essence, attack that particular factory owner. And that, in essence, maneuvered the factory owners to realize they had to organize themselves now. Now they organize themselves into what we know as chambers of commerce. But what we forget is that they were organizing in response to what were chambers of labor. We had, for decades, labor had organized itself, both socially and in physical ways, in the sense of that there were everything from libraries to municipal restaurants to things that labor did that ran itself to, in essence, push back against the bourgeoisie. And we forget that there were chambers of labor. Chambers of commerce, on the other hand, are ubiquitous everywhere. And I think we really need to bend back toward that direction of the notion of organizing amongst ourselves in both places of work and in their neighborhoods in such a way that we can respond to the bourgeoisie, not only at the point of contact of expropriation at workplace, but elsewhere, including outbreaks such as this. Because the state has a class character, and it's in the business of making sure that expropriation continues, and it's any efforts that they continue to help out with unemployment and such is basically all that work that went on for decades to, in essence, support our capacity to defend ourselves. Those are victories of labor in past decades, but they're because the state works primarily for the bourgeoisie, they're perfectly willing and able to chip away at all those things to save capital in its time of crises at the expense of everybody else. So we really need to unplug ourselves out of liberal parliamentarism. It's not the only way to go, and really need to move toward the notion of us starting to make decisions, building parallel governance in a way that permits us to come to immediate decisions about what's best for us. And that's in part the thinking that our group put together with the Agroecology Rural Economics Research Corps. We put up a new effort called Pandemic Research for the People, or PrEP. We've got 6 working groups going whose objectives is to come up with ways and means by which everyday people can be defended in the face of a pandemic. There's a lot of wonderful pandemic research being done, but some of it, by virtue of the money backing it, is in essence in the business of protecting the very system that brought about the crisis in the first place. So we need to move toward on the other direction, building infrastructure and parallel governance that's involved in the business of protecting labor and everyday people. Now, the last one, Jonathan's question. Yeah, the shit has hit the fan. I keep saying that. I mean, it's hard not to say that. You know, it's just like terrible, terrible times. You know, what to do globally. You spoke about, you know, where likely pathogens might emerge. That has long been the push of a field of study called One Health. They're interested in how animals and wild animals and livestock and humans, how their health are integrated with each other. I was part of that movement, and then I bailed, and I'll tell you why. Because their focus, their efforts, some of the, like the Eco Health Alliance, was in part funded by companies like Cargill and Johnson & Johnson, who are in the business of cutting into the forest, causing the outbreaks that happen in the first place. Eco Health Alliance and some of the other One Health people were, in essence, so focused on the GPS coordinates where outbreaks emerge, that they, in essence, focused on what we call absolute geographies, where exactly a pathogen emerged. And a lot of focus was put on blaming indigenous and smallholders for cutting into a forest nearby that led to a specific spillover event. Our group came to reject that in favor of what we call relational geographies, and that what happens on one side of the world impacts what happens on the other side. So our vision of it is that the worst disease hotspots are in places like New York, London, and Hong Kong, which are centers of capital, which are in essence funding the deforestation and development that's leading to the spillover events in the first place. So, you know, it's more structurally oriented. It's not that emergencies don't matter. We very much need to focus on the logistics and the mechanism by which COVID-19 emerged, in my view, in central China. Those questions are important, but we need to take on the more broader picture of how money is moving from one place of the world to the other to, in essence, permit a system of production that is based on alienating land and labor in such a way that the worst damage is spun off on the poorest. And it's not just people, it's the damage is to local environments, to local wildlife, to local rivers, to local labor, the indigenous. You know, if you return all the damage that agribusiness does, it externalizes all its costs on everybody else. If you return that damage back onto the agribusiness balance sheets, agribusiness would end as we know it, because you know, the damage that they cause is something that their bottom line couldn't handle. But that's not a merely economic question. That's a political question. That comes into who controls what. You know, you see, and I keep going back to the meatpacking plant, but you know, the governor's forcing the workers back to work. That has nothing to do with economics. That is entirely about power. That is the class character of the state. That is who runs things, what politicians are paid off, who owns the local public health department. I mean, the extent to which. Now, there are alternatives. And our group's involved with Regeneration Midwest, a group of farmers and food activists interested in introducing regenerative agriculture, which in essence is moving an industrial agriculture to treating agriculture more as a natural economy. That, you know, the seasons and the soil and, you know, growing out animals and growing crops is not making widgets. You know, it's dependent on, to use the reductionist term, these ecosystem services. It's basically healthy soil, clean water. All these things are necessary for us to reproduce ourselves as a society and a civilization. But instead, we are favoring modes of production that are destroying land and labor in such a way that we are upon the precipice of extinction. We are at a historical moment that requires nothing more than abject rejection of our present mode of production and living and social reproduction, and in favor of something entirely different. What that is open to discussion. We could look to indigenous groups who never, many indigenous groups never kept their eye off the ball for 500 years. They kept the notion that indeed we are animals and we are integrated into ecologies. I think that's a good place to start. But in other ways, you know, certainly Marxists along the way, there have been very eco-modernist Marxists who were all about the, industrializing everything. But there was always along the way, including back to Marx himself, that saw wealth emerge not merely from the labor of our hands, but also from nature itself. So in order to keep ourselves going as a society, whatever way we choose, both those things must be protected and respected.
What are your thoughts on treatments? And then what are your thoughts on the haploid versions of the virus?
Thanks again so much for your talk. I mean, I would love to have you on again, talk more about the science. I think the idea of the elimination of biodiversity as an accelerator of disease spread is so interesting. I'm sure you could go on about that forever, but I kind of want to ask a different question anyway. So I guess, it's easy to sort of point to the Trump administration and their, abysmal failings, but I mean, we look across the country, we've seen a failing at every single state level as well. I mean, for example, here in California, you've seen Newsom come out with this promise to do mass testing, mass tracing. They've done nothing. I mean, they've done absolutely none of it. So I guess, it might be a completely useless attempt, but is there any kind of sick rationale to their logic? Have they just given up completely on containing the virus and they just want to let it spread as much as it can because it would disrupt the economy otherwise? Like, why not? It's not as if it's rocket science on what it would mean to carry out a response to a pandemic. This is pretty much case closed, mass testing and so on. What really stands in the main obstacle to this that they've sort of abandoned all projects of that? I don't know, just like to hear your thoughts a little about that.
Part of it, I wanted to also kind of respond from like a strategy of speak out now, I guess, of what we have to do. With nations, I mean, there's nobody that's going to do this for us, and it's exactly what Marx was engaged in. It's why he theorized it all, was how do we overthrow this whole violent, oppressive system? And so the way he did it was finding other revolutionaries who also wanted to do that and root those theories in the power of the working class to be able to take over the places that they are and socialize all of the resources in our society. And I think that's exactly the task that's in front of us today in the most pressing time period and the most crushing time limit. But not to get us down, because my question is really on, like, we talk kind of, and I appreciated the comment by Stefania of kind of this glimpse that I've heard a couple different people talk about, of like, we see people, scientists working together, but they're hampered so much. They're hampered by the entire structure of science and funding and big pharma. And even when one large pharmaceutical company works with other smaller ones, first of all, they have to pick up the slack from where they weren't working together. And second of all, I'm curious your thoughts on just all of the limitations, but mostly if those limitations weren't there, if we really had a collaborative, globally, just collaborative world, like what would we do differently, and just what's the potential here? Because it's amazing what we could, if Cuba and nationalist regimes can do so much independently, what could we do on a global level? Thank you.
I am, as much as anybody else, I daily feel the pain and sorrow of being in a situation of what it seems to be a matter of incompetence, but then also, as I discussed earlier, these are manifestations of a historical moment where it took 40 years for us to arrive at a place of this probably further, going back to notions of individualism, to white settler ideology, to spinning off the worst of damage onto the black and brown, as part and parcel racial capitalism and such. And so in essence, in some sense, it's exactly where we always were in the first place. We just got hit by a virus that didn't get the memo that it was supposed to cooperate with the imperial program. And so that is the wonder and shock, and at the same time hope and beauty, that many countries by far are much poorer than we are in terms of the typical macroeconomic indicators, but however richer in the sense of traditions and cultural expectations, that governance is about helping everyday people. Even in a capitalistic society, there was a notion that we need to be able to protect our population in order to continue to make a buck. And on this side of it, that was completely left aside. I spoke about Vietnam. I spoke about Taiwan. I spoke about even countries as disparate as Iceland and I think Costa Rica comes to mind until recently. I mean, there was, in some sense, some of these countries are small, and some of them are islands. It helps with some logistics of helping out. But, I think of, Taiwan, you show up at the airport, they basically, they check you in, they spray your bag, they put you in a government-funded taxi, only you go to, they give you a couple apps about where a mask is you can buy around the neighborhood. There's another one that's a little bit slightly creepier of an app that tells you who else is infected in the neighborhood. Not exactly who they are, but that this case loads there. Vietnam was all about having doctors everywhere. Cuba, of course, too. Free healthcare, that helps. And so it seems like in some ways, pathogens, it gets to the mirror part, but another analogy is that pathogens move through societies like water flows through cracks in ice. And we have, and some pathogens are much more attuned to that susceptibilities than others. And so, and I think in contrast, the way that, when Trump put the kibosh on Europeans coming back over, all the Americans fled, and then you have those photos of Americans in airports all stuck together and allowed to just basically wave through without being checked or anything. And in essence, we seem to have lost the notion of a public commons, of public health, and the individualism that JJ spoke of is commoditized, and in essence, to survive, the state has largely abandoned everyone except the affluent. So other countries don't do that. And I think that's the hope is, of course, is that, what's remarkable is that without a vaccine or a specific antiviral, these countries basically crush their outbreaks in a matter of weeks. I mean, think about it. Ostensibly authoritarian countries like China and Vietnam will allow their people to walk the streets in a month and a half, while the land of the free, we're all sequestered in. We never even got out of the first wave. I mean, those of us who are able to conscientiously stay at home are still stuck in month 5 and 4 and 5. That's not doing well for our mental health and all these other things. And then the rest of us who don't have that option are forced back onto the subways and into traffic and back to work to be exposed and potentially infected. I mean, so the damage is truly, there's some immediate things we could do ostensibly under a Biden administration. I'm not saying to vote for him or not, it's your choice, but ostensibly they would do some things differently. But I mean, in essence, they would have to just move to some sort of Medicare for all, or some sort of even national health service if you really are you at all serious about doing this. The question came up about MCL came up about contact tracing. And I know that's your name. It's just the initials I see on the screen. But you know, contact tracing, and you're right. It's a complete shit show. Again, it's a different version of the technical term I was using. But in essence, you know, all the damage that was, you know, in essence, the theater that went on between Republicans and Democrats, or the other, this is our domestic version of the United States against China, right? And all the right-wingers came out in April and May to protest the Democratic governors for this. And it's not like the Democratic governors had anything going on other than, you know, some sheltering in place. There was really much nothing else. I mean, the contact tracing, as you got at MCL, is complete crap. And I mean, there are maps out there that you can see what your state's doing in terms of that, but it in no way speaks to the level of intervention necessary. China brought in 40,000 health workers from around the country just into Wuhan to deal with the outbreak. Their strategy was one of suppression. Our strategy was more the neoliberal thing of let's just ride the wave. Outbreak, and then, you know, bring it down a bit, and then send everybody back to work. And then as the ICU beds get filled up, send everybody back to their homes. I mean, that was supposed to be the ideal plan. I mean, it wasn't about suppression. It's like we've completely lost the imaginarium necessary to deal with an outbreak. If I had anything to do with this, I would have hired hundreds of thousands of workers to work on this. And it would be a jobs program that, in essence, not only on the research side, to deal with developed vaccines and all the other things, but also to do what is, in essence, as nurses very much understand, there's a whole epistemology dedicated to, that's different from medical science, and it has to do with the logistics of care. It has to do with, you know, the public health, community health workers. You hire them in the hundreds of thousands, and you have them hit the streets. You go door to door. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm writing this up for my book coming out in September. I write it up about it in the preface. I got COVID-19. I have insurance from the state, but my doctor wouldn't see me. And so I had to be diagnosed with a computer. So I have a nurse who does no testing, looks at my symptoms, says I have it, but no one showed up at my door. No one knocked on the door. I had friends and neighbors leave soup outside, but there's no one from the state stop by, no contact tracing. I'm ostensibly part of the record now, but you should send our hundreds of thousands going door to door. And over the course of the week, there's a mutual aid group called Southern Solidarity in New Orleans that does exactly that with the homeless there. They're doing more work than the state is. They go around and check in on people every few days. What do you need? Do you need food? Do you need help? Do you need a room? Do you need help? So in essence, at a scale that's way too small, but in essence, showing that this can be done, you know, at the level of the state, you can do that and have everybody covered. So you make sure that people, we basically press pause on expropriation. We say our state's in the business as a class character now, that of helping the laboring classes and the rest of the population. And you say, now we're going to put our money to making sure everybody survives this outbreak. So we're going to have a community worker. You know, this is what you do. You send a box to every household in America that has all the masks and all the PPE they need, and you send it every month. And every month we hire a celebrity to come up with a song of the month for our PPE program. And everybody, you know, I'm being somewhat facetious here, but I would like to, you know, Beyonce to do a song for July about PPE, and you know, whoever else does the next month, and it's fun, and everybody gets their PPE. We hang out. Community workers go door to door. Every community worker has their couple blocks that people know them. You have, and this is what's going on in Cuba and Vietnam. They do that. They don't have Beyonce, but they have other things, and they stop their outbreaks. So, you know, and then you have food trucks go by. You know, some food trucks will have groceries. Others will bring in hot meals. And you do it in a way that the community workers don't spread the virus place to place. So there's some work to be done in terms of logistics of that. and people just settle in. We do the quarantine. We do the Italian style. We do our version of the Cameron. We tell stories. We basically hang out, burn this outbreak out over 2.5 months, and we'd be out of it for at least the first wave, because there will be a second and third wave. But we don't let this thing get out of hand. We don't have 4 million infected. We don't let people. 2,000 New Yorkers were found dead in their apartments the first 2 weeks of April. We don't do that. And the acceptance of it, the kind of gaslighting that went on, to the point where we accept our fates in the hands of these these idiots and these incompetents, and in a way very much in the program of a sociopathic performance. I mean, this is what we are. This is the sociopathy that's built into the economics and sociality of a system that was, in essence, settled by stealing land and killing Native Americans and enslaving Black people. I mean, that's, as Malcolm X said it, the names change, but the game's the same. So that program has been rolled over for many a decade, and this is our version of it now. So at some point, there is, as Jolene brought up, there is the matter of you having to get rid of such a thing. But along the way, there are various transitional demands to be met to try to force the bourgeois state to make sure that everybody continues on their unemployment. $1,200 for one shot's ridiculous. It's shameful, it's embarrassing, it's hideous. You've got lines, miles-long lines for people in their cars trying to pick up food at food pantries. I mean, it's a awful, hideous, terrible thing. Doctors and nurses are going down. They don't have the PPE. They're just being slammed by too much coming in. Now fall comes and they want to send all the students to school. That will just help propagate the outbreak further. But the point is to try to get Trump reelected. Of course, Trump is not sending Barron to school. And none of these politicos are sending their kids to school, okay? But they are arguing that you should send your kid to school. So, I mean, this leads into the notion of returning to the notion of these chambers of labor, the notion that one's fate is tied into people in other sectors, the notion of a common identity of all of us helping protect ourselves against a sociopathic bourgeoisie that is in the middle of cashing out on the end of its cycle of accumulation. And to never trust bourgeois politico again, and the fact that we're down to these two here, Trump and Biden, really speaks to the incapacity of that political class to provide its most talented to keep the ship floating.
I understand very well the life of the bourgeoisie and the life of the poor laborer, having had a taste of both. I was a divorced kid with one or the other, stay with the millionaire or stay with the broke mom. And living through that and seeing that a socialist or some other people-centric system would be the answer, what are some of your quick answers to this ideal problem? We obviously need a nationalized healthcare. Do you think decentralized farming is essential? Or return to something like a 1930s, 1940s existence where every suburb was more agricultural than commercial? Are these steps in the right direction?
Thank you very much, Rob. I really appreciate your analysis, and I agree. I think, that's why we exist as an organization. And the mirror analogy, I think, is really correct, except I think what we're seeing is a real magnification. And we're very focused on the question of healthcare. Very soon, we're going to be focused on the question of housing. And with the elimination of the little paltry handout that people have gotten, the question of unemployment is really going to slap us in the face. So we're really looking at a time where we have to overcome the individualism that Jay talked about. And I think we're beginning to start to see that. We're seeing ourselves in sort of the same bucket, whether we're in the United States or we look around the world, even though various people have begun to sort of escape the pandemic because of the regimes they live under. They're still not free, as you said, because we live in a globalized system. So one just very factual question I'm wondering is if the organization you have, or if there are other organizations that sort of lay out what can be protection in a workplace or in workplaces that people can begin to employ as they're being forced back to work. We don't have much meatpacking here, but we do have people who drive buses, and they're starting to be forced. There's the word that they're going to be forced to collect fares again. People have demanded, okay, enter in the rear. People forced into large office buildings to get back to work. So we know that we have to impose this ourselves. We can't wait for anybody else. But we do need some immediate tools. Thank you.
I'm a recent graduate of a biotech program, and I am not a fan of big pharma. They produce drugs and therapies really to maximize profits, not to maximize our health or the health of this planet. And one big example of this that I learned throughout my program was the severe lack of research and development for new antibiotics, which has really left us with antibiotic-resistant superbugs. Yet another thing that we should be fearful of. But really, this is just because it's more profitable to make a heart medication or any other kinds of drugs like that someone has to take for the rest of their life versus an antibiotic that you're only going to take for like 2 weeks or so. But one thing that's not mentioned is that so much money in public funding has already been given to a number of these biotech and pharma companies for COVID research, for a vaccine. But this kind of funding has been happening for decades. We've been subsidizing the pharmaceutical industry this whole time, bolstering their profits. Recently, I actually read from the Times, there's this company, Novavax, just got $1.6 billion for a coronavirus vaccine. However, in their 33-year history, they've never created a vaccine that was functional. And then in many ways, we've never benefited from this collaboration, but the collaboration has always been there. And I think all of us here can agree it's high time that we all start to benefit from this combined knowledge and work in the scientific community and beyond, for that matter.
Yeah, these are all wonderful comments and questions. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to wrap up by trying to spool them together in short order, if I can. Basically, science has been done by all sorts of people, and I'm not just talking about testing hypotheses with reproducible results. I mean, people are brilliant everywhere, and it's really extraordinary to open ourselves up to the notion that solutions can be arrived at by all sorts of people. Scientists included can certainly be a part of that. But we need to start thinking strategically about how do we arrive and work together and arrive at solutions to things, like what to do about bus drivers and such. Clearly, here in the Twin Cities area, we're still entering the buses through the back door. I mean, and the front section's closed off, and everybody's got to wear a mask. And so those are logistical things that are worth fighting for, and we need to make sure to do that. There'll be scientists could help provide the research and the stuff in the literature dedicated to how masks are very helpful and useful, all those things. But that comes from working together, from beyond merely, us eggheads having all the answer. I mean, you have to think of solutions as arriving in practice in the course of day-to-day working together. And that's from everybody. And, a scientist may not be the best person to come up with the solution to what should be done with the buses. There could be some transportation scientists who can do some of this, But really, all these problems are more along the lines of a failure of not just imagination, but a sense of that, who has the right and command to make decisions about what to happen, what can be done. And, that stems out of, in essence, we've been all inculcated with the premises, as I said earlier, with the system we reject and object to. And getting out from underneath that is, I think, the critical first step. I got to tell you, and I was looking online, Unicorn Riot, and here in St. Paul, and watching the protest at 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis. And I tell you, I was so happy that the precinct was burned down. Now, I don't usually say things like that, but a sense of liberation and understanding what that is. I mean, here you have a black and brown subaltern who basically took, the decisions in their hand about what to do with that precinct. And I've had run-ins with that precinct, and they're corrupt as hell. And I couldn't tell you how happy I was. You have to see the miracle of what it means to stand on your own feet and make decisions about what is best for our greater society, and working with other people to make that happen. And to understand that those who run things now are sociopaths or failures, and in essence, not in the position to keep such a society, such as it was, continuing. And so the notions of asking questions about, well, what kind of agriculture can we do, as Richard asked, is critical, because now you're saying all of a sudden, and it's happened, this conversation's been going on for a decade or more here in the Midwest, but there's been really efforts to push the schedule from something that would be a good idea 5 to 10 years now to going, oh my God, many of the smallholder farmers who weren't even connected with industrial ag were basically locked out of processing their livestock because they were still stuck into the meat packing plants that did the butchery. And so what do? Well, we need to, in essence, reestablish the regional abattoirs that used to dot the Midwest. And then this isn't some sort of, nostalgia. I mean, it's basically, spinning out to sort of more regional food systems that are still, while local and regional, are also deeply embedded in what could be central planning. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I've been personally obsessed by these, I hope it's not a marker of me, but these kind of mobile meat processing plants, these trucks that go around from farm to farm and process your hog if you need it. And, I think what captures my imagination about it, that I had never even thought that could be possible. And there are already groups dedicated to this kind of thinking, and all sorts of groups that come to mind that are involved in this kind of thinking and working. There are efforts to, in essence, produce tree range chicken. This is chicken that are grown in silvopasture under forest, farming forests, basically, agroforestry, and here in the Midwest. So you can grow your chickens under the canopy there, and and you could do it at a more than merely a small farm level. And I mean, and this gets back to the notion of what the bus drivers can do and what farmers here. I mean, there are brilliant people everywhere, and they're going to come up with amazing ideas. And I think we need to start trusting people to help, opening up space for them to come up with solutions to these problems that have been foisted upon us. And that is a sense of trust and understanding that people who aren't coming to the mic every night in front of us, whether it be in politics or in commerce, that those people, as was brought up, are in the business of just using the crisis to their advantage at the expense of everybody else, and to tell them to fuck off and to basically burn down some precincts. Whether you want to do that in the physical sense, that's not my ken to say whether or not to do that, but I certainly mean in the proverbial sense, that to basically move toward a future that involves cutting out those who have brought us to this crisis.